This stat feels unavoidable right now, so sorry if this is like the 1000th time you've heard this, but Jeanty had the most broken tackles in the entire FBS with 88 this last season, which if you want to know how good that number is, the second highest for the season, which belongs to another back in this video that we'll cover later on, finished at 69. Then you factor in that the player with the third most had just 44, you start to realize how ridiculous that stat is and how good Jeanty is. Hey y'all! This might feel jarring from the past couple of months of content that I've been doing, but I'm finally covering something that isn't a quarterback again. Sorry for delay in getting these out. My quarterback evals just take a lot of time, so I want to make sure I got those out of the way with first, and then go through the other positions. So we'll start by going through the running backs. This year I'll be doing an in-depth evals of the top 35 running backs in the draft. I felt like it would have been information overload to do all this in one video, so I'm planning to break it up a bit and have it in 7 parts, with each part being uploaded about every other day for the next couple of weeks, and going through the backs in alphabetical order by first name. After that, I'll be covering all the rest of the positions, starting with my top 50 wide receivers, so be sure you don't miss any of the other parts of this running back series or any other position group series. Be sure to subscribe. For this video, I'll be covering Ashton Jeanty from Boise State, Bhayshul Tuten from Virginia Tech, Brashard Smith from SMU, Skattebo from Arizona State, and Corey Kiner from Cincinnati. So let's get this series started. Also, before we get started, as I mentioned in my previous videos, I'm a contributor for DLF or DynastyLeagueFootball.com. If you haven't used DLF or want to try to use their premium service, new users can use my discount code BACKSEAT99 in all caps to sign up for DLF Premium for just 99 cents for the first month. That will give you access to all the articles, rankings, tools, and more. Now, I've also mentioned this before, but I always want to make sure I do repeat this just to make it clear. That makes DLF Premium 99 cents for the first month. And if you don't like it, you can cancel it within that first month and not be charged more than 99 cents. But if you do forget to cancel it after the first month, or you just want to continue having it and using it, it'll be $12.99 every month after the first month. For anyone new to my running back evals, I evaluate running backs based on their contact balance, elusiveness, receiving, pass blocking, vision, ball handling, future role, and their athleticism or RAS score, and then we'll take the average of each score to find a final average grade or score. If you followed my evals last year, the way that I grade each category is about the same, but the big change I did this year is that I no longer factor in their athleticism or RAS score into their final grade. This will be a bit of a controversial change, but I looked at my rankings with the grading scale for the past couple of years, and while they are good at identifying talent, I noticed some misses of players that I did like when watching their film that maybe didn't have the greatest scores. I then looked back at my rankings in previous years before I implemented the grading system, and I felt like they were actually more accurate back then than what I've done recently, with some hits on players like Jonathan Taylor as my RB1 in 2020, as well as fading AJ Dillon in the same draft, and then having Kyron Williams as my running back 3 in 2022, but also fading Damian Pierce in that same draft. I noticed a common correlation between what likely shifted my rankings based on what I saw on film and where they fell in my final rankings was their athleticism or RAS grade, raising the grade for athletic, less polished backs, and some of the bigger body, slower backs who have more polish and well-roundedness fading in my rankings. That would have happened in the year with Kyron Williams had I used that grading system back then, and I would have had a hit with Bucky Irving last year as he's my RB2 before the combine based on his film, but then he plummeted to my RB7 afterwards. I also noticed Devon Achane dropped in my rankings as well, so with a sample of at least 3 quality backs who either did have their grade drop or would have, I knew it was about time to make a change. Now I still have it included here because I do still think it's important to consider, so now what I will do is for each player they'll either have a green, yellow, or red flag. A green flag for their athleticism means that their RAS score falls between 8 to 10, a yellow means it falls between 6 to 8, and red means it falls under 6 most likely. The flag results don't factor into their final score, but they are there for reference to consider if athleticism could be a barrier for them or could help them reach their potential. As for the rest of the categories, they are still included in the final grading and are mostly qualitative measures other than ball handling. Ball handling is based on a scale I've used the past couple of years based on the average fumble rate of NFL starters. So it does have a bit of context and isn't just a random grade that I decided to arbitrarily throw out. The majority of the qualitative measures are pretty self-explanatory, but I do want to help explain how I grade future roles since I think it is a bit more vague. My future role grade is a bit of a summary of the prospect. So do they have great athleticism? Are they a capable pass catcher? Do they have great vision? How's their contact balance and elusiveness? And are they a liability on passing downs? Based on how they are in each category, that gets their grade for future role. So sorry for the long explanation, but I'm never a fan of evaluators just arbitrarily throwing out grades without any context or explanation. So I want to at least give a background of how it works and what changes have been made. So with all that out of the way, let's finally get started and look at Ashton Jeanty. So with Ashton Jeanty from Boise State, we're starting with the consensus #1 back of this year's draft, so going to be good for a good start. Starting with a look at his basic stats, it probably shouldn't come as a surprise if you watch college football, but Jeanty was a monster on the ground, rushing for just over 2,600 yards and scoring 29 touchdowns. To put in perspective how dominant he was, his lowest rushing yards and total yards in the game came against Penn State in the college football playoffs, and he still had 104 yards rushing and 126 total yards. I know he did have 30 carries, but that is ridiculous if that is a player's worst game against a quality opponent. Speaking of that Penn State game, he did a better job holding onto the ball for the season until that game, but had 2 fumbles, which doubled his season total at that time. He also wasn't heavily involved in the passing game with just 23 receptions for 138 yards and a touchdown, but I honestly think that was due to Boise State wanting to have a focus on trying to build his case as a Heisman candidate and bump up those rushing numbers. As you'll see when we talk about his receiving ability specifically later on, he's a great pass catcher, and this has now become an underrated part of his game after all the rushing success he had this last season. But anyways, outside the Penn State game, he was dominant with at least 200 total yards in every single game, including against a quality Oregon defense early on in the year. So while there are naysayers wanting to discredit what Jeanty accomplished and that he beat up on bad opponents, he was doing it all year regardless of the level of opponent that he was facing. Going to Jeanty's contact balance and elusiveness, if you watched him, you should know he's great in these areas as his great strength and center of balance let him stay up through contact and pick up extra yards. He is also able to do this thanks to his tendency to keep his legs churning while still maintaining a good base to keep himself upright. He also is pretty solid at his timing with his movements to be able to manipulate defenders to minimize head-on contact and have an easier job stunning off tackles. He shouldn't have the tackle break ability that he does at his size, but he just looks impossible to tackle at times, even against quality opponents. This stat feels unavoidable right now, so sorry if this is like the 1000th time you've heard this, but Jeanty had the most broken tackles in the entire FBS with 88 this last season, which if you want to know how good that number is, the second highest for the season, which belongs to another back in this video that we'll cover later on, finished at 69. Then you factor in that the player with the third most had just 44, you start to realize how ridiculous that stat is and how good Jeanty is. That being said, I'm not going to pretend he's a prospect with 0 faults, since that isn't realistic about any player. Around the goal line, despite having fantastic contact balance and elusiveness, he can sometimes struggle to generate consistent push in short yardage situations, which may decrease his opportunities in the red zone at his size. Also, at times he can either get stuck in the habit of ducking his head against contact, or be a bit delayed in his moves to cleanly avoid tackles. Also, while he has good cuts, he could definitely be a bit better at avoiding tackles in open space if he had the elite explosiveness in his cuts that some other backs possess. If you compare the quickness and explosiveness of a back like Jahmyr Gibbs or Devon Achane's to Jeanty's, he's clearly a step below. I think he can work to add a bit more explosiveness by working to maximize his balance and be able to pop off his cut rather than simply changing direction. So with incredible ability to shed off tackles but lacking the ideal size and top-end explosiveness, Jeanty still earned very high marks of A- for his contact balance and elusiveness. For his receiving and pass blocking, as I mentioned before, he wasn't very involved in the passing game this season, but I honestly wouldn't be surprised if a part of the reason was due to Boise State recognizing the stat totals he was putting up and doing what they could to win while also helping his Heisman argument. Tangent aside, he already showed the capability of being a strong contributor as a pass catcher, making 43 receptions on 48 targets with no drops for 569 yards and 6 touchdowns in 2023. In the limited opportunities he had this year, he confidently caught the ball with good hand technique and showed the ability to attack balls away from his frame. He also looked comfortable tracking the ball through traffic and had a very smooth transition going from pass catcher to rusher. While I would say he doesn't look as comfortable as a pass blocker, there is a foundation to work with. Though he is small, he is technically clean on a number of reps and does a good job identifying his assignment and getting square with his target. His size unfortunately does limit him at times in pass protection, and he can really struggle to get his feet set appropriately, leading to him getting steamrolled sometimes. Also, he'll sometimes try to compensate for a smaller size by lunging, which leads to limited success. In general, I think he just struggles to get proper leverage and pop, which further reduces block sustainability at his size. So, maybe controversial here, but Jeanty earned an A- for his receiving, but I do really think if you go back and watch his 2023 film, you'll understand why he got that high of a grade. For his pass blocking, due to having some deficits that are technique related and size related, which he potentially may not be able to fix in the NFL, he earned a B- for his pass blocking. For his vision and ball handling, he showed versatility running at a near 50-50 rate of zone and gap run schemes and looked comfortable and confident in running in both. I would say he seems to do his best work in gap schemes when he can get downhill quickly and use his contact balance and elusiveness to make a defender miss and pick up a huge gain. That being said, he isn't a liability in zone schemes as he has good eye for cutback lanes. He's also great at hugging his block and has a good eye of leverage of his blocks and knowing when and where to attack. He's also able to let openings form by running with good tempo. That being said, there are areas he can clean up with his vision and decision making a bit. He can sometimes default to his bad old habit of unnecessarily bouncing a number of zone runs outside. I know it was hard for him to avoid doing this since he consistently faced loaded boxes and had little breathing room, but that will be a likely less viable option in the NFL. Also, he'll absolutely need to do a better job protecting the ball. Jeanty did a better job protecting the ball this season with a fumble rate of once per every 99 touches, which is pretty solid. However, in 2023, he had a fumble rate of once per every 53 touches, which is significantly worse and would have graded out at a D per my scale. So if he continues to hold on to the ball like he did in 2024, then this is probably a non-issue. However, if his fumble rate does go back to like it did in 2023, then it's fair to be concerned if he could be at risk of losing touches down the road. So much more good than bad for his vision, he earned a B+. For his ball handling, with his rate of one fumble per every 99 touches, he earned a B- when comparing to the league average, which is still solid if it stays there, but again, he absolutely cannot go down to where it was in 2023. For his future role grade, as I mentioned before, this is more or less of a summary, and there just aren't a lot of boxes Jeanty doesn't check off. He has elite contact balance and elusiveness, his pass catching ability has become severely underrated, and I think it'll be a bigger part of his game in the NFL. He also shows great vision despite the high number of stacked boxes he faced the last season. Also, his athleticism is still pending, but I think he will test very well if he does decide to do any athletic testing at his pro day based on what he showed on film. Really, the only thing he doesn't do great is hold on to the ball and help in pass protection, which are still both passable, so they aren't major concerns for me. So with all of Jeanty's traits and skills aligning as a clear NFL starter, he earned an A- for his future role grade. Also, we have to do a bit of guessing work with not having athletic testing for Jeanty at this time, but I feel comfortable giving him a green flag for his athleticism or RAS score. So as a summary of Jeanty's strengths, he has elite contact balance and elusiveness that should translate to the NFL. Even if it does take a step back due to his size, it should still be very good to great. Also, his experience running of high volume of zone and gap runs will make any team comfortable taking him as a rusher. I'm also really excited to see him likely get unleashed as a threat in the passing game again. Once he combines that pass catching work and the rushing production, he'll be an absolute force for any NFL offense. With that upside and playmaking ability he brings and his great athleticism, he will be able to be a big play weapon and will likely be putting up big numbers even in his rookie year. While Jeanty is great, he may be more limited in short yard situations at his size. His size also causes issues in pass blocking as does his technique. Also, while his cuts again aren't bad by any means, he just lacks the great explosiveness that truly special athletes do have. Which, I know that is a nitpick, but sometimes we just have to do that with players as good as Jeanty. Speaking of nitpicks, I'd also like to see him be a bit more disciplined in zone runs and not bounce as many runs outside. Finally, what isn't a nitpick is wanting to see better ball security. Again, his fumble rate was fine this year, but this has been an issue in the past, and I don't want that to be a reason why he loses touches in the future. So by taking the average of all his grades, Jeanty earned a 3.29 out of 4, which falls in my top tier prospect tier. I think it's a very fitting spot for Jeanty as there aren't a lot of holes in his game, and he's a scheme versatile weapon. While I do have some concerns about Jeanty's size translating to the NFL, it's hard not to like him as a prospect. He proved to be a dominant rusher this season, and showed his prowess as a pass catcher in 2023. While he does have some holes in his games, despite what some people want to say, teams can game plan around those pretty easily and work to maximize his immense talent. The biggest thing that worries me is his fumbles, but those aren't always a sticky stat, and are things that players can quickly improve in. If he continues to be the dominant rusher and a team gives him more pass catching opportunities, we may be looking at a back who could quickly establish himself as a top 10 back in the NFL. As for a comp, I'm kicking myself for using Eric Jones as a comp last year since I think he's a pretty perfect comp for Jeanty, so I instead have Maurice Jones-Drew as Jeanty's comp. Similar to Jeanty, Jones-Drew is a great athlete with fantastic contact balance and a looseness that helped him overcome his smaller size. Both also have an impressive tendency to keep their strong legs training to shake off tackle attempts that would normally take down a back nearly half a foot taller than them. Also, both have a lot of potential as pass catchers if given the opportunity. Maurice Jones-Drew still found a way to be a consistent force in the NFL despite his limited talent around him and needing to overcome his size limitations, and I think Jeanty can do the same. If he is able to become more efficient in short yardage and pass blocking situations, it's hard not to see him becoming a force for an NFL offense. Now moving to our next back, Bhayshul Tuten from Virginia Tech. Starting with basic stats, Tuten was an extremely efficient rusher with 1,159 rushing yards and 15 touchdowns on just 183 carries. For those that want to save the time of doing quick math, that equals out to a rushing average of 6.3 yards per carry. Now Tuten was less efficient with holding onto the ball and had 4 fumbles, which we'll see later is a high mark for his number of touches. Also, he's a pretty inefficient pass catcher with just 81 yards and 2 touchdowns on 23 receptions, which equaled out to about 3.5 yards per reception. Looking at a few specific games, the game that will jump out right away is his Boston College game. He was nearly unstoppable that game with 266 rushing yards and 3 touchdowns on just 18 carries. The rest of his other games are mostly good to solid with the exception of his Vanderbilt game. At the very least, he did show good pass catching volume in that game with 6 receptions that game, even if he did only total 18 receiving yards. So for the most part, we can see a pattern that aligns with his season totals of typically being very productive as a rusher, but fairly low receiving production. And in the games where he did have a high number of receptions, he still failed to break even 20 receiving yards in either game, which speaks to how close to the line of scrimmage those passes usually were. For his contact balance and elusiveness, while he does like to use a jump cut, he understands the importance of finishing his runs forward and moving upfield to try to at least break even on his runs. When he gets out into open space, he shows off his creativity and great change of ability to make defenders miss. He also has great timing in his cuts and has explosion in his cuts to consistently make defenders miss in open space. If he's not able to escape defenders, he has good awareness to alter his angle to minimize head-on collisions to minimize the blows. That, along with his great footwork, allows him to keep his balance. His height helps with it, but he also runs with great pad level to be able to help consistently finish runs going forward. The biggest thing holding him back from doing this in the NFL will be his size. Similar to Jeanty, while he can shed tacklers in college, that could change against NFL-sized defenders. So with very impressive contact balance despite his size, Tuten earned a B+. For having very little faults in his elusiveness, Tuten earned an A, which, spoiler alert, is the only player in all 35 backs I did evals on that earned this high of a mark, so that should speak to how impressive he is in that category. On passing downs, Tuten has reliable hands when the ball is on his frame. Also, he has good peripheral awareness when he does make the catch to be ready to make a move and try to pick up extra yards after the catch. As a blocker, he has room to grow, but he does keep his feet active. That being said, I'm just not sure how much he'll be able to contribute on these passing downs in the NFL. He's very much a body catcher and seems to have a bit of trouble hauling in balls thrown away from his frame, and will often double catch these throws. That limited catch radius contributed to him being limited to swing and screen passes in college. His blocking is also much worse though. His size already makes it hard for him to be a reliable contributor as a blocker, but his technique makes it nearly impossible. He has trouble identifying his assignment, which makes it hard for him to recover and set his block, and that issue and poor discipline cause him to have struggles getting square with his target. He also tends to lunge and has poor focus with his hands and feet, leading to defenders being able to shed off his blocks very easily. Those heights helps him with his pad level. It doesn't help him enough in his blocking as he struggles to get good leverage and also has bad timing with his hip roll. That leads to weak blocks and a weak anchor, which lets defenders get past him very easily and get into the quarterback's face too easily on too many plays. So due to being an adequate pass catcher, he earned just a C+ for his receiving. For his pass blocking, due to technique issues and his size further compounding his struggles, he earned just a C-. For his vision, he has some of the best and nuanced vision in the class. He is so good at pressing the line to use his burst to win outside, and he also has a good understanding how to best use his tempo on his rushes to give his block time to be able to develop and adjust the course of the linebackers and safeties. Also, he can balance taking runs outside and breaking runs inside and knows when to go to each. When an opening does appear, he has a great eye for cutback lanes and can quickly attack them. Even if the opening is small, he can get skinny through the hole and does a good job hugging his blocks to maximize his gains. In general, he has a great eye to find the most optimal route to get the most out of all his rushes. Despite how good his vision was, NFL teams will need to decide if they feel comfortable with him how he can transition into a more traditional offense. He ran a majority of zone run plays in his career and benefited from a high number of wide zone and read option runs, which likely won't be run as frequently in the NFL, so teams could have some concerns about how it will translate into a different scheme. Finally, teams will have to determine if his fumbles will carry over or if he can put those behind him. He had 4 fumbles this last year and 6 fumbles in 2023, showing that last year's struggles weren't just a one-off thing. So with some truly special vision, especially in zone schemes, and the hope that it translates to more gap-heavy schemes, Tuten earned an A- for his vision. With such a high fumble rate, Tuten earned an extremely disappointing D for his ball handling. The scary thing is that while as great of a D for his ball security is poor, it would have been much worse if I did this based off his final 2 seasons combined, and would have been a D- and nearly would have been an F+, so it is a major concern and something that needs to improve. For his future role grade, the things Tuten does well in, he does very well, and things he doesn't do as well in, he definitely struggles a lot in. He's a menace in space and has good contact balance. His vision is also very good with a caveat of the possibility it could regress in a new offense. However, he is just an average pass catcher at best, which is disappointing since he is a great athlete. Also, he's such a liability in pass pro situations that I'm not sure if he'll be given too many chances to play on these downs in the NFL. So while he is a great rusher with great athleticism, he's more limited than I think a lot of people want to admit. And in his ball security issues, and he kind of has a recipe of a player that leads to likely being benched or losing time in the NFL. So with a bit of a mixed bag of what Tuten can bring to an offense, he earned just a C+ for his future role grade. Also, thanks to his great athleticism, he earned a green flag, which at least bodes well that he may be able to exceed these expectations I have for him at this time. As a summary of his strengths, Tuten has excellent burst and speed to hit a home run on any carry he gets. That being said, he isn't a home run hunter and can win in between the tackles thanks to his great vision to be able to read blocks and search for cutback lanes. When he is in open space, he's very creative with his moves and in using his blocks to be able to make plays above expected. Also, his balance is well above expected for his size and gives him a chance to be a very special rusher in the NFL. That being said, while Tuten has great vision in zone runs, it remains to be seen how it holds up in heavy gap schemes and will be something that he'll need to improve. Also needs to prove he can hold on to the ball better with way too many fumbles these past 2 seasons. He also needs to be way more involved in the pass game and prove he can be more of a playmaker. Having him not be as productive on passing downs feels like a disservice to his athleticism, and he needs to find a way to make more of an impact in those situations. Also needs to find a way to make more of an impact as a pass blocker as well, otherwise he will likely get subbed out in those situations. His technique will need to improve since he isn't growing any taller, and will continue to have his size limit his anchor and potential contact balance as well. So by taking the average of all his grades, Tuten earned a 2.62 out of 4, which falls in my may have a future role tier. This is likely lower than most people have Tuten right now, but I just have a lot of concerns about him in the NFL. My biggest concern is that he's going to be limited to being a 2-down back, or maybe just struggling to get playing time at all. He is undoubtedly a great rusher, but a rusher at his size with his limitations as an athlete often doesn't align to success in the NFL. He'll either need to greatly improve his ability to help as a pass catcher, or as a pass blocker, or he'll be at risk of losing touches in the NFL. On top of those issues likely putting him at risk of losing touches, his fumbles could also be the final nail in the coffin of his contributions if he continues to give the ball up at such a high rate. As a comp, I have Jonathan Franklin as a comp for Tuten. Both are shorter backs that have good contact balance and elusiveness to pick up extra yards as rushers despite their size. Both also show really good vision with a good grasp of nuance to their vision and rushing to make the most out of their opportunities. Both can also be contributors as pass catchers by making catches around the line of scrimmage. However, neither look that comfortable catching past the line or while catching away from their frame. Also, both are poor pass blockers in part due to their size and technique issues. Both also have major fumble concerns which may cost them opportunities in the future. Franklin had some really exciting moments in his very brief NFL career before he had to have his career cut short due to a neck injury. I think had he stayed healthy he would have been a good committee back with a larger role, likely dependent on if his fumbles improved or if he improved in passing situations. I think Tuten could face a similar challenge. With the hype I've seen around Tuten and around the time I'm writing this, I just want to caution people to be careful about having too high of expectations for him just based off athletic testing and some of his big highlight plays. Now moving to our next back, Brashard Smith from SMU. So I would look at his basic stats. You'll see some really impressive production. The context that makes this season even more impressive for him is that this was his first full season at running back as he was a former receiver before this. So to be able to put up nearly 1,700 yards as a new running back is ridiculously impressive no matter where you played. As a rusher, he was very impressive, finishing with 1,332 rushing yards and 14 touchdowns. His receiver background also showed in his receiving production with an impressive 39 receptions, going for 327 yards and 4 touchdowns. Though his production could dip at times, he is so consistent getting at least 60 rushing yards and 80 total yards in all the games on the screen now against Penn State, Clemson, Pitt, and BYU. Outside of those games, he never had less than 69 total yards in any game, which speaks to the regular impact he was able to provide. Also, he only had 2 games all season where he failed to get a reception, and also only 2 where he had less than 12 carries. A lot of times players that convert to running back often are eased into things and don't get a high volume of touches. However, Smith was very busy very often and heavily leaned on, which shows he can handle a fair workload in the NFL. So while the workload seems like less of an issue with him being a new running back, let's see how well he plays. Despite being a former receiver, he doesn't look soft like some receivers sometimes get labeled. He doesn't shy away from contact as a runner and will often cut his runs back inside if there's an opening instead of being safe and just going out of bounds to avoid a hit. He also has good discipline and effort to keep his legs moving through contact. When he did face a defender in the open field or in the hole, he used his quick feet and great change of direction ability to make them miss. For a back who's new to the position, he also has a surprising arsenal of moves that he can use in open space. That being said, a smaller frame at 5'9", 194 pounds could limit him. We saw some contact balance issues for him throughout the year as he really struggled to get any push and was sometimes stonewalled in short yard situations. More times than not, if a defender got him square, they won the battle and they stopped the play right there. He needs to work on doing a better job of anticipating contact and adjusting his body to more easily slide off tackles and use that elusiveness to win more consistently. Also, he needs to work on running with better pad levels since he's still very much an upright runner, which could limit his contact balance. As I mentioned, he has a lot of moves he can use, but right now he just kind of needs to work on his timing and when to use them. Unfortunately, with his contact balance still looking like that of a receiver, he earned just a C- for his contact balance. His looseness was extremely impressive though, and he earned an A- in that. His receiver background shows with his ability to make some really impressive adjustments that no other running back in this class can make. It's just one example, but he did the Santonio Holmes Super Bowl sideline sketch against Pittsburgh this season, so if you want any idea how good his ball tracking is and concentration is, just check out that clip. He has such great hands for the running back position and still has a route running ability to run advanced routes from the receiver spots and can get consistent separation. Also, he shows really good awareness to be able to move with his quarterback on rollouts and find openings against the defense. All those factors make me confident in saying that Smith is the best pass catching back in this class, which should be expected as a former receiver, but still, quite a testament with how good this class is. While he still has room to further develop in his pass protection, he does seem confident finding his assignment, which is a good start. Other than that though, he absolutely needs to improve his pass protection skills. It's a big work in progress with him often having bad timing with his feet and upper body, often leading to minimal pop that he's delivering. Also, his hands are often slow at the point of attack, and he'll often have his base crumble as he braces for the hit, leading to him being able to be easily shed by defenders. Right now, he more often than not is just trying to hold up his target, but I wanted to see him bring more intensity to try to level them. When he is trying to give a bigger hit, he often does a lot of ducking, which is dangerous and often leads to blocks not quite hitting their mark. So it probably shouldn't be shocking, but the former receiver earned an A for his receiving. He unfortunately did earn a C- for his pass blocking though, since it's still a work in progress and may be limited due to his frame. Smith also showed really impressive discipline and improvements in his vision as the year went on. With each passing week, he seemed more and more confident and would shift from going for home runs and take more consistent games, which is a great development. He was also a bit wary of trying to fit through tight creases at the start of the year, but did a better job knowing when and where to attack and improved his inside run ability as a whole as the season went on. Even at the start of the year, I was very impressed with his eye for leverage and his comfort hugging his blocks, which can sometimes take back multiple years to figure out. He even showed signs of using good tempo and a lot of runs, which again, is something a lot of backs just sometimes have a hard time figuring out. He also showed a good eye for optimal paths to take to be able to maximize his opportunities. That being said, his inexperience at the position can show as he sometimes has trouble putting some nuances to running the football. He isn't at the point where he's comfortable regularly pressing the line and needs to have better awareness for cutback lanes since he can sometimes rush things and miss them. Finally, his ball security was very impressive for a former receiver with a fumble in every 137 touches. Also, it's worth knowing that both fumbles came against BYU, so outside of that single game, he was perfect at holding onto the ball. So maybe I am getting a little bit too impressed with how he was at the end of the season and also just hopeful of his future improvements, but I do truly believe that Smith earned a B for his vision. Also, his body of work holding onto the ball earned him a B for his ball handling. As for his future role grade, it should be obvious with his background that he's a very strong pass catcher. What might surprise people is how good his vision is and how it looks more advanced than some backs who have played that position all college and high school. He also has great athleticism and movement skills to be able to big-time playmaker. He still needs to work on getting his pad level a little bit better to help his contact balance, and he needs to get more comfortable in pass blocking situations, but hopefully those come with more experience and time at the position. So with a lot of potential, Smith earned a B- for his future role grade. For his athleticism or RAS score, we got our first yellow flag since Smith ran fast, but didn't quite do as well in his jumps and is pretty underweight. As a summary of Smith's strengths, his receiver background makes him the best pass catcher back in the class. I felt confident in assuming that early on in my eval, but feel very confident after finishing all 35 players. He's a huge threat in space with his athleticism, which could make him very desirable to NFL teams. He also has incredibly impressive vision for a first-year running back, and if it continues to improve at the rate it did this last season, I'm very excited to see what the final product could look like. With as high of a ceiling that he has thanks to his athleticism and pass catching skills, while still learning the position, he feels like a great lottery ticket for a team to go after. As much as I do want to hype him up, I do have to admit that his pad level and contact balance in general is a huge red flag. He needs to find a way to consistently stay up after initial contact, otherwise he'll be too limited to just pass catching opportunities, which then also begs the question, why bother switching positions? At his size, I'd be shocked if he suddenly became a back who could push through lines and goal line situations, and I don't think he'll ever be part of that in his game. I'd also like to see him get more comfortable finding cutback lanes, as that could open up more opportunities for him as a rusher. In general, he still needs to work on nailing the nuance as a runner. I think he could get there with the progressions he had this last year, but still something he needs to work towards. Finally, he absolutely needs to work on improving his pass protection. I don't know if he'll ever get to a level where it's good, but he needs to at least be average to help stay on the field on passing downs. So by taking the average of all his grades, Smith earned a 2.86 out of 4, which falls in my good role player tier. For reference, this is pretty high for a running back to score, and these scores don't often weigh in potential as much as other grades out there do, so to be this high in his first year as a running back is incredibly impressive. So I think I'm likely going to be one of Smith's biggest fans during this cycle. I think he is at worst a good committee back who could contribute regularly in the passing game. That alone has its value and could appeal to a lot of pass-heavy teams. Normally I'm lower on backs who lack good contact balance, but Smith having the pass-catching ability he has, combined with some really great progress in his vision, makes it really hard not to become a fan. He is likely the ultimate lottery pick and could really pay off big if he goes to a team with a creative offensive coordinator. As for a comp, it may be a lofty projection, but I have James Cook as his comp. Similar to Smith, Cook also has a lot of experience playing from the receiver spots and is capable of being a regular contributor in passing game. Also, both have solid vision to be good contributors on the ground and have good elusiveness to make up for their lack of contact balance. Both are also undersized, which shows in their ability to hold up in short yardage situations. However, both can be major playmakers for the right offense and can be leaned on in the right situations. We've seen James Cook really take off as he's gotten more comfortable with his vision, and I think we could see Smith have a similar situation where he really takes off in the second half of his rookie contract. So while this may be a very lofty projection, I do think this is a very real possibility for Smith if he continues his current trajectory. Moving on to our next back, Cam Skattebo from Arizona State. From a raw statistical standpoint, Skattebo gives Jeanty a run for his money for the most productive running back this past year with slightly over 2,300 total yards and 24 total touchdowns. He did a lot of this on the ground with a heavy workload of 293 carries. However, he wasn't just limited to the ground game as he had 45 receptions for 605 yards of his total yards. That's incredibly impressive no matter how you look at it. It becomes even more impressive when you see how he was still able to be a major force in a lot of the team's biggest games. Skattebo rushed for at least 140 yards in every single of the 4 highlighted games against Texas, Iowa State, BYU, and Utah. Also, he was still a regular contributor in the passing game, especially against Texas where he put up nearly 100 receiving yards. So while there are definitely concerns for Skattebo that we'll get into later, from a production standpoint, it's just hard to argue with these results. While Skattebo may have some speed limitations, he certainly doesn't have any power limitations with some of the best contact balance in the class. He finishes nearly every run going forward and brings so much pop to hits that let him drive through high arm tackles. He also comes at defenders with great pad level while never stopping his legs to consistently have good drive. He has great leg strength and balance to often withstand the initial tackle attempt and shows no fear looking to lower his shoulder into oncoming defenders. Though he can seek violence, he also has good awareness of getting off center from defenders to make it harder for them to bring down. He also shows some really advanced awareness by taking advantage of safety in the cornerback's anticipation of needing to bring more power to tackle him and making last-second adjustments leading to whiffs and tackle attempts. While his power and contact balance are great to see, that often is enough to be successful in the NFL. Outside of his lack of great speed, his stiffness can show with his struggles changing direction, and with his limited ability to make defenders miss in the open space due to his cuts lacking explosion and being too slow developing. So with his fantastic contact balance, Skattebo earned an A, which for reference, Skattebo is the only back in the class that earned an A for his contact balance, so it's that awesome. What's not as awesome is his Elusiveness, which ended up earning just a C-. His pass catching is a thing that also helps him likely have a very high floor in the NFL, as he catches the ball with good hand technique and has reliable hands. He can easily track the ball in the air and has a smooth transition going from receiver to rusher. There's still a lot of room for improvement as a pass blocker, but he at least shows good identification skills in his assignment and has the strength to potentially be a good blocker in the future. While some people will want to point to his versatility and how he was used as a reason why his lack of athleticism is overblown, and he'll just likely be as productive in the passing game in the NFL, I think it's important to look at the results in those spots and specifically at the receiver spots. Skattebo had a combined 51 snaps out wide and in the slot per PFF last year, but was very rarely targeted in those situations, which shows with an ADOT of just 0.2 this year. Getting away from the stats, you can also tell by watching him that the defender is often right in his hip and has him covered since his lack of ability to create separation with his limited athletic ability. So while it's fun to think about the versatility he can have, I think we also need to consider the functionality in those situations. Another thing that will likely hold him back is his poor pass blocking. Despite Skattebo having a physical approach to the game, he is a very sloppy pass blocker which often wastes his efforts. He often settles for lunges and dives which also lead to a high number of whiffs. When he does stay upright, he also does a lot of head ducking which can be very dangerous, especially if he throws his body at defenders. He also needs to improve his timing with his hands and hip roll as the lack of synchronicity often leads to less of an impact than he was planning for. He also needs to improve his footwork as a blocker as his feet are often too static and his base is often not stable enough to be able to provide a clean hit or stay with his target. So with Skattebo still showing a lot as a pass catcher, he earned an A- for his receiving. However, for him still showing a lot of improvements needed in his pass blocking, he earned just a C-. His vision is another reason why he'll likely earn touches in the NFL. He showed good vision in both gap and zone runs and has a good eye for cutback lanes. He's a really patient runner who lets openings form, then will burst through them and will use good tempo to buy time. He also does a good job hugging his blocks and well-timed jump cuts to bounce around traffic. He is also one of the better runners at pressing the line to get defenders biting, which is much needed to help him overcome some of his athletic limitations. His great eye for optimal angles and how to take the most efficient path also helped him overcome some of those athletic limitations. Finally, I think there's a bit of tune-up he can do with his eye for his blocks. I think he mostly does a good job, but there are a few times when he can sometimes misread the leverage of his blocks. It can also be a bit too reliant on just trying to plow through defenders. It can also have a habit of doing that around the line of scrimmage, leading to him dropping his head and missing some holes. Also, he can sometimes be a bit too patient looking for an opening, leading to a minimal gain around the line of scrimmage. He can also do a slightly better job keeping his head up when he gets to the second level and look to use his blockers around him. His ball security is also average at best and could be improved if he had more focus to hold onto the ball while trying to break tackles. Due to Skattebo having great vision on the majority of his runs, he earned a B+ for his vision. With his lapses of holding onto the ball when he's trying to go through contact, he earned a B- for his ball handling based on his fumble rate. As for his future role grade, there's a lot Skattebo does well that translate to being involved in an NFL offense. He has great vision and contact balance that at least guarantees him to be a solid 2-down back. However, he's also very effective as a pass-catching option, which adds another dimension to his play and gives him true 3-down ability. However, his pass blocking could put him at risk for losing some snaps in passing situations in the NFL. Also, his fumble rate isn't terribly high, but he can work to improve that as well to have less of a risk of being benched. With all that in mind though, the biggest thing that holds me back from being confident that Skattebo will be a productive NFL running back is his lack of athleticism, as I mentioned before. While he brings great power and effort, his straight line speed is often lacking with a number of times when he gets tracked down from behind. The traits are great, but that lack of speed won't make him a great match for every team and will also leave less room for error for him. So, though I do wish I could be high on Skattebo's future role grade, teams just may not feel that he's a great fit for every NFL offense, and some of his limitations led him to get a B- for his future role grade. For his athleticism or RAS score, though we don't have testing results at the time of the video, I feel he would likely earn a red flag due to his poor straight line speed. As for a summary of his strengths, Skattebo is a very reliable pass catcher, which makes him more than just a 2-down back. However, he still has that great vision between the tackles that the 2-down backs have and should be able to effectively work in gap and zone schemes. He also has a good jump cut to be able to navigate traffic and help either minimize contact or avoid tackles that allow him to get bigger gains. When defenders do get their hands on him, they better be prepared for a battle because he isn't easy to bring down. He also brings fantastic effort to be able to push piles, which also gives him good red zone potential. That being said, his lack of speed is concerning and could limit him in the NFL and potentially for playing time depending on the coaching staff and scheme. Also, his trouble making defenders miss in open space isn't inspiring and could further limit when he gets out in space. He also needs to work on ensuring he's protecting the ball and not losing focus when trying to steamroll defenders. While he was used in a variety of different ways, I don't think this is a Tyler Warren situation where he will be playing from receiver spots in the NFL, since he wasn't overly productive in those situations. Finally, since he'll likely be playing in a traditional spot next to the quarterback on passing downs, he will need to improve his pass blocking to protect the quarterback and keep earning opportunities in those instances. So by taking the average of all his grades, Skattebo earned a 2.86 out of 4, which falls in my good role player tier. While Skattebo is a fun name and a good story, I think we need to be more honest about his limitations. There is a track record of successful running backs who aren't great athletes, recently including David Montgomery, Kevin Williams, James Conner, and more, so there is a precedent for a player like Skattebo to work in the NFL. The problem is that those players, and smaller players in general, usually get playing time thanks to being good to great pass blockers. Right now, Skattebo isn't close to even being an average pass blocker, so it makes him hard to trust. Despite that, I think he does add enough on the ground as a pass catcher to at least be productive committee back. Achieving anything past that will depend on how he responds to NFL coaching and in his blocking. As for a comp, he's a tricky player to comp since a lot of players with similar playstyles as him are much bigger than him. However, Skattebo does have a history of playing in the 220s, which does give a little bit of wiggle room. So I'll use that wiggle room and comp him to Ramondre Stevenson. Similar to Skattebo, Stevenson got a lot of fans in the pre-draft process thanks to his contact balance and soft hands as a pass catcher. Both also can generate a lot of push and show good vision as runners. However, both lack great top-end speed and explosion in their cuts to help them break off big gains. Both can also struggle to make defenders miss in open field and can have ball security issues. While I feel Stevenson is another case of a back with good size and good pass blocking skills, I think he's more accurately shows the type of player Skattebo can become in the NFL if he does get playing time. While Stevenson disappointed fans last season, he still provided good value for the Patriots when they select him on day 3, and Skattebo could provide that same value if he does fall that far. Moving on to our final back for this video, Corey Kiner from Cincinnati. I'll admit that I didn't watch much of Cincinnati this year and was going to Kiner's eval pretty blind. When I got to him, I was near the end of my list of running backs to grade and was a bit burnt out, but Kiner injected some life into me. He's a very productive rusher with over 1,000 rushing yards and a 5.7 yards per carry. He wasn't the most effective at scoring touchdowns, but that ability to gain yards is impressive. Also, he wasn't overly involved in the pass game with just 16 receptions for 111 yards. We did that on 16 targets, so that at the very least shows that when he's targeted, it usually leads to be a reception. In his key matchups included here against Kansas State, Iowa State, Arizona State, and Pittsburgh, he's worked in all these games with over 100 rushing yards in each game. However, similar to his season totals, he wasn't scoring as he didn't have a single touchdown in any of the games, and wasn't very productive as a pass catcher with no more than 2 receptions in any of the games. So I think it's very clear that we can probably assume that he's a decent rusher, but let's start to look at how he grades out to get some more context. Despite his small size, I was very impressed with his great contact balance. He runs a good pad level, though to be honest it's kinda easy at his size, but he keeps his strong legs moving to be able to break through tackles and get more push than he should be able to at his size. His ability to finish most runs falling forward is very impressive and helped him get some form of positive gain on nearly every play. He's just so great at getting defenders to slide off him and has good footwork to help keep himself up and avoid tackles. When he has a good plan in space, he can make defenders miss. He definitely is great at making some really great runs and cuts, but he's often a bit too slow in deciding the best course of action. He also has this spin move that I swear he just spams sometimes like he's being controlled by someone playing Madden. Also, his small size will likely limit him more in the NFL, and it's a fair question to wonder if his contact balance will still be as good against better and more athletic defenders. So with really impressive contact balance, Kiner earned a B+ for his contact balance. Also due to having good ability to make defenders miss, even if he couldn't always do it, he earned a B- for his elusiveness. While he wasn't the most productive pass catcher, I do think there is a bit of untapped potential there. When he was targeted, he got the ball with good hand technique and looked comfortable catching the ball away from his body. As I mentioned before, it wasn't a high number of targets, but Kiner didn't have a single drop on his 16 targets, which should at least show that he is a more reliable pass catcher than his season total may indicate. His pass blocking definitely needs work, but he does a good job identifying his target and does a good job getting square with his target. While Kiner showed a lot of promise as a pass catcher, he just hasn't shown the ability to earn targets with just 32 career receptions. When he is out for routes, he ran a pretty limited route tree that was primarily near the line of scrimmage. Also, his transition from pass catcher to rusher can sometimes be a little bit awkward and gives the defense time to crash down on him. As a pass blocker, he often resorts to lunges instead of clean blocks. Also, he has poor timing with his punch and often doesn't get his base set, which further impacts his anchor. Honestly, he got blown up and bullied so many times in pass production due to poor technique and his smaller size, so I'm just not confident he'll ever get to a passing level in the NFL. So though I am optimistic of Kiner capable of being more involved as a pass catcher, he has some ways he can improve to help justify earning more volume and justify earning a higher grade than a C+ for his receiving. For his pass blocking, he just really struggled a lot and honestly struggled against pretty average to above average competition, which makes me concerned these issues will only be worse in the NFL at his size. Due to that, he earned just a D for his pass blocking, which is tied for the lowest in this grade for this entire class. Going back to some positives though, Kiner has a great eye for cutback lanes. He also has a great eye for leverage of his blocks and his correct processor of his blocks at the second level. He also does a great job getting skinny through tight holes and shows the ability to press the line of scrimmage. However, he did run a majority of his runs out of zone runs, and he'll need to prove he can handle gap schemes in the NFL or be at risk of losing opportunities. Also, he will need to hold on to the ball better to not risk losing opportunities as well, since he had a rate of a fumble on every 73 touches, which is average at best. So though he looked great in zone runs, his questionable fit into gap runs dropped his vision to a B-. Also, his frequent fumbles led him to earning just a C for his ball handling. For his future role grade, I want to be optimistic, but there are a lot of things that do concern me. Sure, he showed good vision in zone runs, but can he handle gap runs? Also, he had good contact balance, but will that hold up at his size in the NFL? Also, he looked good catching the ball, but that was just on 16 targets, so what does he look like when he's getting more volume, and can he handle that increased volume? Plus, can he even become passable in pass protection situations to be able to justify being out on the field in those situations? Then you add in the poor 40-yard dash time and the fumble issues, and it just becomes harder and harder to justify having him on the field. Like I said at the beginning of this section, there were a lot of moments that definitely caught my attention that made me excited about him, but there were also a lot of moments that also caught my attention in the wrong way. So with just a lot that could limit his playing time, Kiner earned just a C- for his future role grade. At the time of recording this, we only have his measurements and the 40-yard dash time from the combine, but with a smaller size and the poor 40 time, I might be being a bit too harsh, but I ended up giving him a red flag. Now if he does do better at his pro day, then I'll definitely adjust this for my final rankings, but I would rather underestimate than overestimate him and kind of base it off what the information we have right now. For a summary of his strengths, he has great vision on zone runs and is great at taking advantage of cutback opportunities or even manipulating defenders at the second level to create his own opportunities. He also has surprisingly good contact balance at his size, which helped him finish with most of his runs going forward. Finally, though he didn't have great volume as a pass catcher, he did show good pass catching fundamentals to potentially get more opportunities in the future. Though he showed good vision in zone runs, how he performs with a heavy dose of gap runs is a bit of a mystery, which could make teams nervous. Also, I like to see him have more creativity in space. He has good cutting ability and moves he can pull off, but he doesn't execute the way that I'd hope he consistently would to be able to make defenders miss. He also showed good ability as a pass catcher, but his limited experience could make it iffy if he is truly capable of handling more volume in the NFL. Regardless, his poor pass blocking technique may make that receiving point just an irrelevant point. So by taking the average of all his grades, Kiner earned a 2.24 out of 4, which falls in my unlikely to contribute tier. Kiner was a pleasant surprise for me to watch, but I don't want prospect and eval fatigue to get the best of me and ignore his limitations. I think the difficult thing with Kiner is that there are a lot of question marks about him that makes it difficult to know what to expect from him. His vision is great and should hopefully translate, but he needs to be able to prove he can play well in gap runs. His contact balance was good in college, but could take a step back in the NFL. His hands do look good, but there's just so few reps that he can go off of to be able to prove that he can be counted on more. If one of those things turns out to be a clear yes to NFL teams, I'd be more comfortable having him higher. However, at this time, there's just less questions about some of the other prospects ahead of him that are also more athletic than him. As for a comp, I have Robert Turbin as a comp. Turbin was a bit thicker than Kiner, but I think both are very similar players with okay athleticism and slightly smaller height. Both, however, were explosive athletes which showed in their cuts and feet and ran with great contact balance. Neither were big contributors in the passing game but had the ability to not be liabilities. However, both were very poor pass blockers which limited their opportunities to play on passing downs. Also, both had their contact balance worsened when they entered the NFL. Turbin was the most flashy player, but he did have a long NFL career which is pretty impressive for a day 3 running back. I wouldn't be surprised if Kiner is capable of a similar results, especially if he's able to prove that either his vision or his contact balance can translate to the NFL. And that's all for the first set of backs. Let me know what your thoughts are on all the backs in the comments and who you think I'm too high or too low on. As I mentioned before, there's just part 1 of 7, so there will be several more done over the next couple of weeks. So be sure you don't miss any of them, be sure to subscribe. While you're at it, like the videos, it would help the channel and the series grow thanks to you. If you want just a written form of the eval, you can subscribe to my Substack as I'll have the full written eval out for each player at the same time as the video. But thank you all and see you all next time.